A black CEO boards a flight after a long week of meetings, looking forward to nothing more than silence, legroom, and a chance to review tomorrow's keynote, but the moment he takes his seat in first class, everything spirals. A flight attendant singles him out, demanding he move for a so-called VIP passenger. Cameras roll, tension rises, and within minutes he's forcibly removed from a seat he paid for. But what the airline crew didn't realize, the man they just humiliated wasn't just a passenger, he was the company's largest shareholder. What happened next turned the entire airline upside down, cost people their jobs, and changed corporate America forever. Stay with me because this is a story that doesn't just shock you, it teaches you. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, and if the story hits you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter. It all started with what should have been a simple flight home. There was something almost holy in the way Marcus Richardson walked down the terminal that morning, shoulders back, head held high, not in arrogance but in that quiet, time-earned grace our generation recognizes. The kind you see in old soldiers, or in the face of a man who's been told no so many times that he learned how to build his own door. At 42, Marcus had done what so many of us were told was impossible. He climbed, not just to success, but to significance. The son of a steelworker and a school secretary from Southside Chicago, he had stitched his future from the ragged edges of second-hand opportunity. He taught himself to code on a computer with missing keys. He studied under streetlights when the power got cut. When others went left, he went deeper, not faster, deeper. So when he arrived at the gate, ticket in hand, platinum membership shining like a quiet badge of honor, it wasn't entitlement he carried, it was a life's worth of earned belonging. And still, somehow, that wasn't enough. The flight attendant didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. That's not how it's done anymore, is it? These days, discrimination wears a softer coat. It smiles when it insults you. It uses polite words with jagged meanings. There seems to be a mistake, sir, she said, her voice sweetened with the practiced indifference of someone used to being believed. Behind her stood a woman, white, expensively dressed, with the sort of entitlement that comes from never having to prove she belongs anywhere. She tapped her designer watch, not out of urgency, but to remind the room what she believed she deserved. "That's my seat," she said. Not a question, a declaration, a line drawn in the air. Now, I want you to pause with me here, because this is the moment that matters, not the confrontation, not the headlines, not the aftermath. This is where a choice lives, where a person is asked no, expected to shrink, to apologize for existing where someone else believes they should reign. Maybe you've been there. Maybe it was at a lunch counter in the 60s, or the front steps of a church. Maybe it was when you walked into a bank or tried to cast your vote. We carry those moments like hidden bruises beneath our Sunday best. We don't talk about them much, but they don't leave us. And neither did Marcus flinch. He reached into his wallet not just for the card, but for the truth. He had the right to be there. He earned the right, and yet the attendant dismissed it. "This seat is typically reserved for a better customer," she said. "Not another customer, a better one. You hear the difference, don't you? Now, I'm telling you this not because I want to stir up your anger. No, I tell you because we are the generation that remembers what it means to stand, to be told we don't belong and to sit anyway, to endure, to build something they said we couldn't. And we know the cost of silence. We've seen what happens when you keep your head down and hope it all just passes. But hope doesn't build justice. Hope doesn't shift culture. Action does. So if you hear this story and feel that sting in your chest, that old, familiar fire, let it move you. Not to rage, but to remembrance. And from remembrance to resolve. Because, my friend, we are not too old to matter. We are not too late to act. We are the memory of what was, and the seed of what still can be. And when they look at us, our wrinkles, our slow steps, our weathered hands, they forget that we are the ones who carried the world forward, inch by inch, breath by breath. So don't look away from Marcus. See him. See yourself. And when the world tries to move you from your rightful place, say the words he said, with calm, with clarity, and with the full weight of history behind you. "I'm not moving. Now tell me, when have you stood your ground? What did it cost you? And was it worth it? Let that be the beginning of your next stand. It started with a whisper, the way injustice often does not with fists or fury, but with a subtle shift in tone, a practiced glance, a quiet decision made behind a polite smile. You've seen it before. Maybe it was when you walked into a restaurant and were seated by the kitchen while others breezed past you to the front. Maybe it was in the bank line, when they asked you for 2 forms of ID and proof of address, but didn't bat an eye at the man in the tailored suit behind you. It's not always loud. Sometimes prejudice dresses itself in professionalism, and that's what Marcus saw when Trevor, the flight supervisor, approached. Tall, sure of himself, with the easy confidence of someone who believes they will never be challenged. Trevor didn't ask Marcus to move, he instructed him. As if Marcus were a child in a place he didn't understand. We accommodate worthy customers, Trevor said. Words sharp as a blade dipped in honey. You know the type. The kind that tells you your presence is a disturbance, but with a smile so tight it could snap. And Marcus, sitting there with his boarding pass in hand and dignity intact, had a decision to make. Yield to the pressure or anchor himself in the truth. But let me ask you something. Have you ever been tested like that? Sat in a room full of strangers, all eyes on you. Your skin suddenly heavier, your breath just a little harder to control? When a man's voice drops low enough to feel like a threat, but polished enough to pass HR. That's where Marcus sat. And when Karen, the self-appointed queen of row 2A, let out a dramatic sigh and announced her important meeting, her voice echoed not just through the cabin, but through generations of entitlement. The whispers from the other passengers weren't accidental. One said, "He doesn't even look like someone who can afford it." That wasn't about Marcus's wallet. That was about Marcus's existence. But you and I know our worth has never come from their perception. Comes from our persistence. Now here's the lesson buried deep in that moment. Silence is complicity. And too many of the people on that plane were silent. Phones recorded, yes, but where were the voices? Where were the allies who should have said, "He has every right to be here"? That's a question we must ask ourselves too. Because if you've lived long enough, you know that justice rarely moves without a push. So I ask you, who have you spoken up for lately? Who have you defended, not in private but in public when it counts? Because the world doesn't change through opinions, it changes through interruption. Through someone stepping in, saying, "This isn't right," and refusing to step back. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He looked Trevor in the eye, and with a voice like still water, calm, deep, unmoved, he said, "I'm not moving." 6 words. That's all it took to draw a line, not just across that aisle, but across history. And you, dear reader, you who have marched, who have prayed, who have buried friends, who fought for change, you know how powerful those 6 words can be. So I invite you to remember them, speak them, teach them, live them, because sooner or later, each of us will be called to choose between comfort and conscience. And when that day comes, may we be ready not to run, not to fold, but to stand, just like Marcus did, in the full light of who we are, unshakable and unafraid. And if you're wondering whether your voice still matters in a world that moves too fast and forgets too quickly, let me remind you, your generation was the first to say enough. Don't stop now. Not when so many still need to hear it. The moment the captain entered the cabin, it was as if the air shifted thicker, quieter, expectant. You could feel it, like how a church grows still before a sermon, or a courtroom right before the verdict. Authority had arrived, not cloaked in compassion, but in uniform and protocol. Captain Reynolds, with his silvered hair and pressed attire, walked the aisle like a man used to being obeyed. And maybe in most cases he would be. But this wasn't just another day in the sky. This was a test not of policy but of principle. And you know this too well because you've lived long enough to remember when uniforms demanded silence, even when they were wrong. Marcus sat there still, grounded not just in his seat, but in something deeper, his right to be there. Calm as a tree in the wind. Not unshaken, but unbroken. 3 employees towered over him now, the flight attendant, the supervisor, and the captain himself. The triangle of quiet intimidation. The kind that doesn't require yelling, it just waits for you to fold. And maybe they expected him to. But Marcus didn't stand down. He stood in. in who he was, in what he knew, and in a world that tells some of us we must always justify our presence. His stillness was thunder. But here's what you need to see: what made this moment dangerous wasn't Marcus's defiance. It was his dignity. Because dignity is louder than protest. It unsettles the comfortable. It shines a light on systems that would prefer to remain in shadow. And in that light, the cracks begin to show. The captain gave his warning, final and cold: move or face removal. That was the moment when most people shrink. When the temptation to say, "it's not worth it," becomes deafening. And yet, Marcus didn't retreat. He reached into his jacket, slowly, purposefully, not for a weapon, but for truth. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and let the world watch. Now, you may not be fluent with smartphones, may not use TikTok or live streams, but you understand the power of bearing witness. You remember when photographs from Selma shook the conscience of a nation. When a single televised march made presidents move. Marcus wasn't just recording an event. He was inviting history to take notes. And this, my friends, is where we learn something vital. We are never too old to document the truth. Never too late to raise a mirror to injustice. You may not march like you once did, but your voice still echoes. Your memory still matters. The very act of remembering and telling that is a form of resistance. So here is your action. Don't let the moments that shaped your courage fade into silence. Tell them, to your grandchildren, to your neighbors, to your community. Speak not only of what was done to you, but of what you refused to let stand. Marcus didn't fight with fists. He fought with presence. And when security came, called in like a hammer for a nail that never needed striking, he did not flinch. He asked, with the clarity of a man who has faced this before, "What rule have I broken?" And when no one could answer, their silence was louder than any apology could ever be. This wasn't about rules. It was about roles. And Marcus had violated the one they silently assigned him. Invisible. But here's what I need you to remember. Right now, you are not invisible. None of us are. Not if we choose to be seen. Not if we stand our ground, not just in airports, but in boardrooms, at family dinners, at polling places, in our daily lives. You've walked too far to turn back now. You've earned too much wisdom to waste it in silence. So when the world comes for your seat, your space, your voice, your dignity, you say it, with all the generations standing behind you. I am not moving. Not now. Not ever. There comes a point in every struggle, whether it's on a bus in Montgomery or in a quiet voting booth, when dignity meets its fiercest test. And for Marcus, that test came the moment the security officers boarded the plane. Their footsteps were not loud, but they echoed with the weight of history. We've heard them before, haven't we? In train stations, in lunch counters, in courtrooms where the verdict was already decided before a word was spoken. They walked not with cruelty, but with compliance, the kind of obedience that has always been dangerous when it forgets to ask why. As they reached Marcus's row, the silence on board was deafening. No one cheered, no one stood, and still Marcus did not yield. He looked them in the eye, not with defiance, but with a question that has unraveled empires. What have I done wrong? And when no one could answer that question, not clearly, not truthfully, the shame did not fall on him, but on the system that demanded his removal. It was not anger in Marcus's voice, nor fear. It was clarity, calm. And in that calm, something radical unfolded. A man stood his ground while being forced to leave it. And if you've ever stood in line to vote while someone tried to turn you away, if you've ever been followed through a store just for browsing, if you've ever had to overprove what you already earned, then you understand this moment. It is not about ego. It is about the right to simply be. When Marcus gathered his things, he did not slump. He rose, slowly, deliberately, like a man who understood that how you leave says more than how they made you go. As he passed by Karen's smirk, as Trevor stood pretending this was just another day on the job, a voice quiet, hidden behind a phone, whispered, "He didn't do anything wrong." Another said, "I'm recording all of this." These were small sparks, but they matter. Because every movement begins with someone saying, "I saw it too." And maybe you've been that witness before, too afraid to speak then, but wishing you had. That's okay. What matters is what you do now. Because the call today is not to change the past, but to rise in the present. Be the voice that didn't speak up back then. Be the elder who says to the young, "We've seen this before, and we won't let it repeat." As Marcus stepped off that plane, escorted but unbowed, the world began to shift not because of rage, but because of documentation. His phone still recording, his voice still calm, he sent a message not of revenge, but of responsibility. "They picked the wrong person to humiliate," he said, "not with spite, but with certainty. That's the kind of strength we need now, not to destroy, but to reveal. To shine light so bright that even systems designed in shadow cannot hide. So here's what I'm asking of you. Don't let that moment pass like a story you once heard. Carry it like a lantern, because every time you tell someone, every time you say, 'This happened, and it is not okay,' you fan the flame. Every time you stand beside someone treated unjustly, you extend Marcus's story beyond the cabin of that plane, into churches, schools, city halls, and kitchen tables. Use your story not just of what you endured, but of what you overcame to remind the world that silence is no longer an option. It never was. You've lived too much, seen too much, fought too long to stay seated now. So speak, rise, and when they come for your truth, walk forward with your head high, and let them know with presence, with patience, and with purpose you are not the one who should be ashamed. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all, it's revelation. Not the kind that shouts or slams doors, but the kind that walks quietly into a boardroom and lets the truth do the talking. When Marcus Richardson stepped off that plane, he wasn't just a man removed from his rightful seat, he was a mirror. A mirror held up to a system that had gone too long without checking its own reflection. And here's the part they didn't see coming. Marcus wasn't just any first-class passenger. He was the founder and CEO of the very company Skylux Airlines, had been courting for months a $2.8 billion tech firm poised to revolutionize their entire infrastructure. In other words, the man they humiliated was their would-be savior. Now, if that doesn't sound like divine symmetry to you, then maybe you've forgotten how justice sometimes loops back, not in anger, but in perfect poetic timing. Because haven't we all been there in some way? You spend your whole life being told to wait your turn, to not make waves, to understand how the world works, only for the world to come knocking, asking for your help when it's drowning in the very mess it once blamed you for. Marcus didn't storm into headquarters waving a banner. He sent a message calm, direct, and unshakable. "As your largest shareholder," he began, "I am calling an emergency board meeting." Just like that, the power shifted not with threats, but with truth backed by receipts. "And I want to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. You don't have to be a CEO to hold power. Power is in your memory, in your voice, in your refusal to forget. Think of all you've survived: Vietnam, segregation, factory layoffs, redlining, Jim Crow, glass ceilings, and yet here you are. You hold the kind of wisdom this world desperately needs. So when injustice shows its face, don't ask, 'What can I do?' Ask instead, 'What do I already know?'" That's what Marcus did. He didn't invent justice that day, he activated what he'd already built. A life of principle, a team that believed in him, and a mountain of quiet preparation that made him unshakable when the storm came. And when the videos of his removal went viral, when the media picked it up and the public began to roar, Marcus never once had to raise his voice. That's the power of being rooted, of having spent a lifetime building something the world cannot take from you. So here's what I hope you take from this. Keep building. Build your circle. Build your story. Build your values so deep they can't be moved. Because one day, yes, even now, especially now, the world may try to put you in the back again. And when it does, your response won't come from panic. It will come from preparation. So tell your grandchildren. Study harder than they expect you to. Tell your friends. Record what you see and speak on what you know. Tell yourself. Every act of kindness, every firm stand, every time I refuse to be erased, I am laying down bricks for something they cannot knock over. And the next time someone tries to say you don't belong, let them talk. Let them underestimate. Then walk into the room they thought you'd never enter and say, with the full power of your years behind you, "Now let's talk about who really owns this place." The beautiful thing about truth is that it doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be seen. And when Marcus Richardson stepped into that boardroom, wearing the very same suit he had been humiliated in hours earlier, he didn't come looking for revenge. He came carrying something heavier: accountability. The walls of that room were tall, glass and steel, like the men who built them, confident, polished, comfortable. But when the video played on the giant screen frame by frame, from Jessica's tight smile to Karen's bribes to Trevor's smug command, those walls didn't seem so solid anymore. You could see it in their faces, the slow crumbling of self-assurance. Some looked away. Some shifted in their leather chairs like schoolboys caught cheating on a test. And Marcus, he just sat there silent at first, letting the evidence do what his voice didn't need to. That's a lesson we learned long ago, isn't it? That sometimes, to change a room, you don't need to raise your voice, you only need to bring your receipts. The truth, my friend, is undefeated when it's patient and prepared. When Marcus spoke, it wasn't with rage, but with precision. "I have one demand and one decision," he said. One. Just like we said in the streets decades ago, one step forward, one vote cast, one voice raised at a time. His demand: every person involved in his mistreatment would be terminated. His decision: the $50 million contract he had once considered with Skylux was now off the table. And suddenly, every eye in that room was wide awake, not because of his anger, but because of his influence. That's what I want you to hear today. Influence isn't about shouting louder than your enemies. It's about standing firmer than their expectations. That's what age gives us, the deep roots that storms can't shake. And when that young analyst burst into the room waving a tablet showing the company's plummeting stock price, it wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a moral reckoning made visible. But Marcus didn't stop at punishment. He offered something rare in today's world: transformation. He called not just for consequences, but for correction. Mandatory training. Systemic reform. A pause, yes, a literal grounding of all flights for the sake of reflection. Who does that? Who pauses profit for principle? I'll tell you who: someone who knows that real justice isn't about payback. It's about planting seeds in hard ground. And here's the part where you come in. Maybe you're not in a boardroom. Maybe you're not holding stock. But you've got a front porch, a church pew, a weekly coffee meetup. And that is your room, your place of influence. And you can choose every day to plant the seed of truth right there. Tell your stories. Speak your wisdom. Let the younger ones know what it really means to stand up when sitting down would be easier. Because listen, age isn't retreat. It's strategy. You've seen too much to act hastily now. So be like Marcus. Composed, clear, and unbending. Speak when it counts. Move when it matters. And remind every system, every boardroom, every seat of power: we may grow older, but we do not grow silent. We may walk slower, but we walk stronger. And the steps we take now, they ripple further than we'll ever see. So keep walking, keep planting, keep raising that one steady voice. The world still needs it more than ever. There are moments in life when history holds its breath, when a man, a single man, becomes the hinge upon which an entire system must turn. That was Marcus Richardson in the days that followed the scandal. He didn't just walk away with a moral victory, he walked into the heart of a wounded machine and dared to heal it. Skylux Airlines had no choice but to reckon with its reflection. Gone were the press statements with polished apologies, the half-hearted pledges of diversity training tucked between stockholder meetings. This time, the change was real, visible, immediate. Every flight grounded. Every employee from pilot to porter ordered into a room, not for punishment, but for awakening. And Marcus, in the center of it all, didn't stand above them, he stood among them. That matters, because too often people in power disappear when it's time to do the work. But Marcus knew that true leadership doesn't lead from the podium. It leads from the circle, eye to eye, heart to heart. He spoke not just of what happened to him, but what happens to countless others without cameras, without companies, without power. And in that room, even the skeptical ones, the ones who'd rolled their eyes, crossed their arms, found themselves listening. Not because they were forced to, but because the truth has a sound you feel, even when you try to block it out. You and I both know that kind of transformation doesn't come easy. It's not neat. It's not fast. It's not comfortable. But it's necessary. And I want you to remember this. Just because you're not flying planes or signing million-dollar contracts doesn't mean you aren't holding levers of change. You've got influence. You've got stories. You've got grandkids who watch how you treat the mailman, the waitress, the neighbor who doesn't look like you. That's power. And Marcus used his not to condemn, but to construct. He helped rebuild a company from the inside out, brick by honest brick. That's what justice looks like when it grows up. Not rage for the sake of rage, but clarity with a spine. Think of the old oak trees down south, the ones that bent but never broke. The ones you used to sit under on hot afternoons with your friends, passing around lemonade and memories. That's Marcus. That's you. Strong not because the wind didn't blow, but because the roots ran deep. So what do we do now? We take the lesson. We carry it forward. We mentor. We correct with kindness. We challenge with courage. We look younger generations in the eye and say, we've seen what happens when you look the other way and we're not going back there. Your age is not a barrier, it's a badge. Wear it like Marcus wore that suit back into the boardroom, not for show, but for story. And let that story remind everyone around you that true justice isn't about shaming the guilty. It's about inspiring the possible. And the possible starts with one step, one voice, one moment when someone like you says, I've lived long enough to know better and I love this country enough to expect better. So speak, share. Don't stop now, because there's still work to be done and Lord knows, they still need us. It takes a rare kind of strength to offer a hand to those who once tried to push you down, and an even rarer kind of wisdom to understand that justice without redemption is only half the journey. Marcus Richardson knew that. That's why, months after the headlines had faded and the company had begun to heal, he didn't walk away with the victory in his pocket and the door slammed shut behind him. No, he opened another door. He launched the Second Chance program, not for applause, but for accountability that leads to growth. Think about that. He could have buried Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds beneath the weight of their mistake. But instead, he built a bridge, one paved with hard truths and steep expectations. And I'll be honest with you, that's not weakness. That's legacy. You see, we were raised to believe in second chances, weren't we? Not the cheap kind that asks nothing in return, but the kind earned through sweat, sorrow, and a willingness to face yourself in the mirror. That's what Marcus offered. And slowly, those three people, once symbols of blind compliance and prejudice, began to change. Not instantly, not easily, but honestly. Trevor, who had once stood so smug and superior, found himself in a circle of strangers, saying out loud, I never thought I was part of the problem. Jessica, through tears, admitted her silence hurt more people than she realized. And Reynolds, the seasoned captain, finally understood that following orders doesn't absolve you of doing what's right. That, my friend, is the power of mature justice. Justice with eyes wide open. The kind that doesn't stop at punishment but insists on transformation. And let me tell you, this kind of justice belongs to your generation. You who marched, who wrote letters, who sat in silence when it was the only protest you were allowed, you know the weight of real change. Not performative change. Not social media slogans. But change that comes from the gut. That shakes your beliefs. That stretches your understanding of who deserves to come back from failure. And here's where I ask you to act. Share that part of your story, the parts where you got it wrong, and then got it better. Teach your grandchildren not just what to fight for, but how to forgive without forgetting. Let them know that real power isn't just about being right, it's about being ready to do what's right when it's hardest. Marcus didn't just reform an airline, he redefined what it means to lead. And in doing so, he reminded us all that sometimes the people who fall hardest are the ones who rise with the clearest eyes. Skylux didn't just bounce back, they became a symbol of possibility. Their stock rose, yes, but more importantly, so did their humanity. And maybe, just maybe, in a world starved for integrity, that's the kind of success we ought to measure more. So here's your legacy. If you choose it, be the voice that says, we are not finished yet. Be the steady hand that reaches back, even when it trembles. And when the world looks to you, as it surely will, for the path forward, let them find not bitterness, not silence, but a soul who still believes in better and is brave enough to build it.